Yep.
All right. Well, I would like to call to order the May 11th, 2026 workshop for the City of Greenville. Mayor Conley can't be here tonight, so I'm Mayor Pro Tem Tanya Foreman and will be presiding over tonight's workshop. Madam Clerk, can you do the roll call?
I will do. As Mayor Pro Tem said, Mayor Conley let us know he will not be able to make it this evening. Mayor Pro Tem Foreman,
Here.
Councilmember Jones, Councilmember Hardy,
Here.
Councilmember Scully,
Here.
Councilmember Robinson,
Here.
Councilmember Willis.
Here.
All right, Mayor Pro Tem, you have a quorum.
Thank you. We will now move on to the approval of the agenda. Mr. Manager?
Mayor Pro Tem, I have no changes.
So moved.
Second.
Motion made by Councilmember Willis and seconded by Councilmember Hardy.
Aye.
All those in favor?
All in favor, say aye.
All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
New business?
Hearing none opposed, 6-0, 5-0.
All right, thank you, Mayor Pro Tem. The first item on our agenda under new business is a code enforcement update. And before we get started, I'd like to make a few comments. This code enforcement has had a lot of conversation over the last couple of months with concerns to some minimum housing standard issues that we've had both at multifamily developments as well as some of our housing developments. But I think that the real light started to shine last October when on a Sunday afternoon, Mayor Pro Tem called me about some issues that we were having in a multifamily development. And when we got involved and the chief building inspector got involved with the code enforcement department, and we found that basically the living conditions were quite bad. And then we started to dig a little bit deeper into the status of code enforcement within the city and how proactive that we have been, or lack of proaction that we've had with the city. And since this time, we have basically had an overhaul of the department. And what we're in the process of doing as a city is to create a new culture within code enforcement. And what we'd like to do tonight is to spend some time with you talking about an overview not only of code enforcement, but the direction that we're going. And a lot of the work being spearheaded by the Mayor Pro Tem and Councilmember Hardy to look at specific areas of our communities that we know that we have issues. And I will say that as much as we'd like to think that this could be fixed overnight, it's not going to be. This is a process where we have to have procedures in place, we have to have comprehensive change, and we got to be much more proactive. But we are committed as a staff to making sure we are moving in the right direction, and I like to say it is a new day, and I think you'll be seeing that over the next several months and years as we continue to accentuate what we're doing within code enforcement. So with that being said, I would like to now turn it over to the Director of Community and Development Services, Tiana Behrman, for the presentation.
All right, good evening, council. This presentation provides an overview of the city's code enforcement division, the legal framework we will operate under, current trends we're seeing related to public nuisance, minimum housing, and a proposed action plan focused on proactive enforcement, outreach, and stronger case management. There we go. All right, so tonight's discussion is organized into two primary sections. The first is an overview of the code enforcement division, including minimum housing, public nuisance enforcement, and the tools available to staff. And the second, I'll discuss a proposed action plan focused on proactive and consistent enforcement, outreach and engagement, and improved case management practices. Code enforcement contributes to several city council goals and priorities, including enhancing safety, wellness, and environmental responsibility, building a thriving and attractive community by creating meaningful access to affordable, habitable, and quality housing, making Greenville a destination community and place for all to call home, and enhancing community engagement. As part of the city's organizational realignment, effective January 1st of this year, code enforcement and building inspections now operate under the same departmental structure. This alignment creates stronger coordination between inspections and enforcement functions, particularly for minimum housing involving structural, electrical, plumbing, and mechanical concerns. Our goal is to improve efficiency, communication, and response time while ensuring residents receive clear and timely information. This slide reflects the current organizational structure for the division. Code enforcement operates within Community Development Services under the Assistant Director, Mr. William Mills. The structure includes 1 supervisor, 9 code enforcement officers, working collaboratively with building inspections. Code enforcement currently has 8 full-time officers, 1 part-time officer. 2 of these full-time positions are vacant, and we have 2 new hires. Okay. The division is responsible for enforcing both state statutes and local ordinances related to minimum housing, public nuisance, and junk and abandoned vehicles. In addition to enforcement, staff plays an important role in neighborhood stabilization efforts through community connection, education, and coordination with residents and property owners. This chart illustrates the division's overall case distribution for this calendar year, so January through, I believe, yesterday. The majority of the cases involve trash and debris complaints, followed by overgrown vegetation and grass violations. Minimum housing cases represent a smaller percentage numerically, but are often significantly more complex and time intensive due to legal requirements, inspections, hearings, and compliance monitoring. So the trash and debris is in blue, grass and weeded lots is red, minimum housing is green, and junk vehicles is purple. You can't see that clearly. Right. Effective code enforcement requires shared responsibility. Property owners are responsible for maintaining safe and compliant properties. Tenants also have the responsibilities related to cleanliness, access, and reporting issues appropriately. City staff manages inspections, enforcement, outreach, case coordination, and council's role includes formal action of unsafe properties when necessary. The city has a range of enforcement tools available depending on the severity and responsiveness of a case. We often attempt voluntary compliance first. However, additional tools include notice of violation, civil penalties, liens, lis pendens filings, nuisance abatement, demolition authority, and chronic violator designations when necessary. Okay, so the next 2 slides actually summarize the statutory and local ordinance authority that allows the city to address nuisance conditions. This includes authority related to overgrown vegetation, public health nuisance, and junk vehicles under both North Carolina General Statutes and the Greenville Code of Ordinances, but neither are an exhaustive list. All right, and here are some examples of common nuisance conditions that staff address regularly, including trash accumulation, junk and inoperable vehicles. These conditions impact neighborhood appearance, public health, and quality of life, and often generate significant resident complaints. This slide outlines the standard public nuisance process. Once a complaint or observation is received, staff conducts inspections, issues notices when necessary, and allows reasonable time for compliance consistent with due process requirements. If compliance is not achieved, the city may abate the nuisance directly and charge associated costs back to the property owner. So we're looking at potentially 3 to 4 weeks from observation to complaint, of observation or complaint to abatement, and I would say typically worst case scenario, if we cannot achieve voluntary compliance. One of the major challenges we continue to encounter is the concentration of deteriorating housing conditions, particularly involving absentee or non-responsive property owners. These conditions contribute to blight and neighborhood decline, but also present an opportunity to align enforcement efforts with broader revitalization initiatives, including but not limited to the city's 50 and 10 affordable housing strategy. All right, so the next couple slides summarize the legal framework governing minimum housing enforcement. State law and local ordinances establish minimum standards intended to protect life, health, and safety. The code establishes baseline expectations related to structural integrity, utilities, sanitation, weatherproofing, and fire safety. All right, this slide outlines the city's authority to condemn unsafe buildings when conditions create life safety concerns. Examples include severe structural deterioration, unsafe electrical systems, inadequate exits, or fire hazards. Condemnation authority is an important tool, but one that is used carefully and within strict process requirements. And here are some photos that reflect actual examples of conditions staff encountered during inspections. The issues shown include water intrusion, structural deterioration, unsafe stairs and balconies, mold and moisture damage, exposed building components, failing flooring systems, and unsafe electrical or interior conditions.
And these are pictures within multi-family developments that we have taken in like the last couple of months.
Absolutely.
Yes, so, I mean, those kind of conditions exist, and that is our focus to go after them.
Okay. All right. So we have, let's see, a number of definitions or categories that require different levels of, or different types of approach. So the first, one of the key terms that we're looking at is within minimum housing enforcement includes unfit for human habitation, deteriorated, dilapidated, and condemnation. All, these definitions help determine the appropriate enforcement pathways and legal remedies available. Specifically for unfit for human habitation, this slide provides the formal ordinance definition and is intentionally comprehensive. It includes conditions that pose risks to health and safety, including structural failure, fire hazards, lack of utilities, unsafe electrical systems, sanitation concerns, inadequate weather protection. Deteriorated versus dilapidated. These slides distinguish between deteriorated and dilapidated properties. The deteriorated structure may still be repairable within a reasonable cost threshold, while a dilapidated structure is considered beyond practical repair. So this distinction is important because it determines whether rehab or demolition becomes the appropriate course of action. So here's an example of a deteriorated property, something that with some TLC and a reasonable investment could be habitable again. And then dilapidated properties are those that the best course of action would be demolition. All right, so the next several slides we'll walk through detail the minimum housing enforcement process from complaint intake through compliance and enforcement. Unlike many nuisance cases, minimum housing cases involve a more formal legal structure, a more formal legal process, including hearings, findings of fact, timelines for compliance, re-inspections, and when necessary, council action. So through the process, staff balances enforcement responsibilities with due process protections and opportunities for voluntary compliance always. All right, so the first is the complaint process. Let's see. Oh, there we go, opening the case. So with opening the case, this is when we would have a code enforcement officer either identify, or following the identification or observation of the issue, they would begin inputting their findings into the system. We are transferring our process from using public stuff to InterGov to help with consistency, with planning and inspections. They're currently using InterGov, and this will help to kind of streamline that process and improve communication. Notification is distributed to parties of interest, including the property owner, the tenant, and The ability to track the status and document events is also going to be important with our managing the case in InterGov. All right, when it comes to the inspection, we are evaluating the actual conditions cited in the complaint versus any additional issues that are identified when the code enforcement officer goes out. Typically, this occurs within 72 hours of, from the time that the complaint or observation is made. All right, the complaint and notice of hearing. So serving the complaint, we do utilize certified mail to ensure that the notice is received. The hearing is held between 10 to 30 days after the complaint is made, and the parties of interest are invited to participate or required to participate. Issue the finding the facts in order. So at this point, staff are establishing a timeline for compliance with the property owner. Typically, that's going to be within 30 to 90 days. And then filing of the lis pendens creates a public record to ensure that even if the property is transferred, that it is the case is not lost with the house. Right, and this allows the case to continue even after a property is transferred, like I mentioned. Okay. So compliance and enforcement, there's a reasonable timeline established for compliance with cited violations. There are re-inspections to ensure that good faith effort is being made to make the necessary repairs. Extensions might be permitted if the property owner is checking those boxes and demonstrating that the work is ongoing. All right, there's a potential for issuance of civil penalties and fines to help us in achieving compliance in a reasonable timeline. And formal action by council may be required if there's non-compliance by the property owner. So that's when we would be looking at demolition. All right, let's see. All right, so this slide outlines the demolition process for non-compliant or unsafe structures. Demolition is a lengthy process governed by state law and requires multiple stages of notice, hearings, compliance opportunities, and council authorization before action occurs. So while we were looking at a couple weeks before with nuisance abatement, we were looking at a much lengthier timeline when it comes to ensuring that the minimum housing is addressed. All right, so our proposed action. Looking ahead, the proposed action plan focuses on protecting public health, neighborhood integrity, property values, and quality of life through equitable and consistent enforcement. This strategy centers on the three key areas: the proactive enforcement, outreach and engagement, and stronger case management. When it comes to proactive and consistent enforcement, we're highlighting the proposed operational improvements related to this area. This includes evaluating ordinance updates, conducting proactive inspections, utilizing available legal tools and more consistently, and improving interdepartmental coordination with police, fire, public works, and building inspections, which we are starting to see a better communication.
And I'd like to say that this is part of that change in culture I spoke of. What we have been consistently doing in the past is pretty much just waiting for complaints to come our way. But this means that we are using our eyes to go out there and identify issues ourselves, and to be very proactive in identifying those cases and opening up those cases ourselves. So then this is a change in procedure. And then one of the things, well, I'm going to just lay it out, I'm going to be real with you. This is where the staff's going to need the backs of council, because this is a change. I mean, when we're being proactive, we're going out there, clearly, we're looking for code enforcement, minimal housing standard violations. And so you will probably hear about these in the community, but no, it's because we are tightening the screws on these issues.
I have a question, Michael. How many properties would you estimate are properties that we could look at specifically for, say, something like the 50 and 10 initiative? How many properties would you say right now are viable options for dilapidated homes right now?
Well, and I think we're going to get to that process here in a
Okay.
second. So,
Okay.
Um, oh, wait, hold on, let me see. Okay, so what we do know is that enforcement is not enough. The division also plans to expand outreach and engagement efforts through community sessions, focus on multifamily developments, the university area neighborhoods, and West Greenville.
And could you go back and talk about the target audiences?
Oh, absolutely. So we are looking to have a number of outreach sessions specific to renters, landlords, and property owners. We know that the type of communication needed, the language needed, the approach, all of that will vary based on who we're engaging. So we are looking to partner with different entities to better support renters and their needs through fair housing awareness and related areas. And then we are looking to have, or have already started, having some intentional engagement with property owners and landlords in more renter-concentrated neighborhoods.
And again, this is also part of being proactive, where we actually go out into the community. We'll set up engagement sessions where we are talking to tenants, we're talking to landlords, talking to property owners about what the process is that we'll be following, not only from a proactive perspective, but also for tenants that have issues related to their properties, what the process is for being able to open up one of these code enforcement cases. And that's also in the process. I can't say that we actually have a number, but by going through this process, we'll identify the properties that have the highest need. For example, if there's another multifamily development out there that we need to be targeting, that's when we'll communicate the tenants within that area to say that we're going to have these open sessions. At the same time, if we've got a house that clearly is a public safety issue because it's got a hole in the roof, then that will be logged as well in the process. So it's not just like a number. It's just the part of being proactive.
Right. And I was thinking single-family homes.
Yes.
So we have identified at least 70 homes
Oh, wow.
in and around West Greenville that are in need of repair. So we are working, so while code enforcement is aware of, from an enforcement standpoint, that helps us now that we're communicating more efficiently. We can also look at what support could be available depending on the circumstance, right? If there's an owner-occupied unit, is that something that we can, is it a viable, would owner-occupied rehab be a viable option? If we have folks that are absent landlords or just absent property owners in general, are those properties that might be, would they be interested in selling those properties to the city such that those parcels can be made productive with the 50 and 10. So we're looking at things from a number of different angles, but certainly looking to support the community to achieve their goals as individuals. But we recognize there's not a one-size-fits all for any of the situations. Does that answer your question?
Yes.
Okay.
Thank you.
All right, so we have, as I mentioned earlier, a number of partnerships that we are looking to develop and to cultivate, including working with existing community groups, legal support services, continuing communication with HOAs, and property managers, property owners, and then meeting the needs of tenants as well. And part of that also comes with the opportunity for home ownership, should that be a good fit and an interest for some of the individuals involved. And we're also looking to distribute reminders and guidance through seasonal campaigns. So that might look like move in or move out over in the university area. We know when the grass starts to grow, so making sure that we are hitting the streets around those times where there are predictable events that typically require code enforcement action.
A good example of a community group would be, and Councilmember Hardy, I hope you don't mind, can I talk about what we, so Councilmember Hardy and Mayor Pro Tem Foreman have been looking at groups of property owners, specifically in north and east, on the east side and on the west side, and pulling those property owners together in the month of August and basically discussing with them, hey, look, we're going to be going out to your tenants, okay? And we've got property owners, property managers that are actually pushing this. Responsible property managers on the east side that actually came to us and asked us for this. And very well respected. I mean, I'm not going to use any names, but many of them you know fairly well. And so we're going to move forward with their request, and we're going to be meeting with the property owners and talking to them about these are the things that we're looking for. And it's not to be a, I got you, by no means. It's just basically if, quite frankly, if the refrigerator doesn't work, it needs to be replaced.
That's right.
If the air condition doesn't work, it doesn't need to go the whole entire semester and not work. I mean, we're talking about, the key word I use here is minimal housing standards. These are certain needs that the community has that need to be met. And so I think that many of the property owners on the east side and on the west side are anxious about helping us move through this process.
And then we've got case management. So this slide focuses on operational improvements to case management. Code Enforcement Division is prioritizing better documentation, real-time tracking, improved transparency, streamlined scheduling, and the use of data to identify trends and repeat violations more effectively. So the case management system is being converted, as I mentioned, from public stuff to InterGov and will ensure consistency in communication, tracking, data reporting, as we have with planning and inspections.
And that really gets into the technology of how we track. We got to have a system where if we log the case, that Tiana went through every step of the process, the legal process, but we've got to make sure that every time that target is hit, we're going on to the next process. That's how we make sure that we're moving these cases forward and that they just don't sit there for months and months and not be addressed.
So in the short term, staff will continue evaluating ordinance updates, implementing technology improvements, and strengthening training and engagement efforts. In the long term, we intend to use data and performance trends to guide resource allocation, where and how we direct staff, districts that they're working, improving processes, and ensuring that the division continues operating in a consistent, equitable, and effective manner. Okay. All right. So, if there are any questions,
A very comprehensive approach, changing in culture within the code enforcement division, and we're going to get better as we go down this road. And I'm not here to I'm the city manager. If there's anybody that blames me, but a lot of this was not created overnight, and I've been real transparent in saying that it's not going to be fixed overnight. But our goal is to put the processes in place, the technology to allow us to track those processes and be proactive in the community, and specifically with concerns to minimal housing standards. And now we'd open up to council for any questions.
I don't have a question, but I do have a comment, and I want to say thank you. And I think that Seth and I agree on this with addressing this issue. We have a lot of people. Will you go back to the pictures? Back further.
Yeah, go back to the beginning.
These are pictures that we've taken over the last, I would say, 6 to 8 months. And we have citizens in the community, some of which are living in inhumane conditions. We do have some property owners that have been cooperative and willing to sit down and talk with us, but we also have some property owners that have been abusing the process. Now, I do hear Michael say that, you know, if there's anyone to blame, it's him. I won't accept that because this issue has been compounded over a long period of time. And if anything, he is to be commended for the fact that when it has been brought to his attention, being willing to do what is the hard thing, is to acknowledge where issues are and accept responsibility for what the city's role is in it, and then take proactive measures to try to address the situation that has been there long before he took on the role. So I do want to say thank you for that. Also, moving from a complaint-driven system to proactive measures helps us when it comes to issues that have been identified consistently within one property group, number one. And number two, it helps us to prevent retaliation, because that's something that we've experienced over the last several months also, where citizens have been retaliated against when they've complained. So I want to say thank you for that. And do you have anything you want to ask?
I wholeheartedly agree with Mayor Pro Tem Foreman. I would find it interesting to see how high we could get that caseload number for
Right.
the minimal housing cases from 7%, because
I wrote
obviously
that down too.
that's one of the biggest pressing issues, in my opinion, in my district. It's just minimal housing standards, and obviously it's a large issue that a lot of people are experiencing, and it was kind of surprising to see how low that number was. So I'd be interested to see how high we can get it caseload-wise when we really start hitting the ground hard on this.
Councilmember Hardy, I'm glad you pointed that out, because yes, that screams off the page on that graph that that number needs to be higher than that.
And obviously, all
That's
those
how
other
you-
things are important as well, but
That's how you measure how proactive you are being. For example, again, we're not here to dive into the weeds. I'm not here to indict anybody, but our chief building inspector basically saw walls bowing out on a multifamily development, and that led to a process where it's currently being mitigated. And you might have even seen the braces on a building. That does not look attractive by any means, but it is being addressed based off of proactive engagement. That's just one of a lot in this community. And I know, I'll go ahead and say it too. I mean, look, I know we have some blighted areas. We need to make sure we're working with police to make sure that those are boarded up and we do not have vagrants in those units. But what is more important to us at this moment in time are people that are living in minimal housing conditions,
Absolutely.
substandard conditions. Those are the ones that are actually impacting the people's daily lives. And those are the areas that we're going to be targeting.
And unfortunately, a lot of those people are the least likely to complain because they are unaware of their rights, and they probably feel like nobody cares, including us. So I mean, I'm really proud of us for taking this step, being proactive, and I'm really excited about the education piece, letting citizens know what their rights are and how the process works, and then being proactive and moving those cases through, making sure we're being proactive when we receive a complaint. You know, I have a lot of employees that live in apartments, and they, you know, I hear a lot of complaints. My air conditioning doesn't work, my laundry doesn't work. So I mean, it's an issue throughout the city. So I mean, I'm really
We have senior
thankful for y'all.
citizens that have been without heat and air for 2 and 3 years.
Yeah, it's crazy, and they don't know where to go for help. So I mean, I'm glad we're out there being proactive.
That's part of the education. We have not done that as a city. I'm not going to sugarcoat this, though. The other side of that is that individuals are scared to speak
Absolutely.
because of fear of retaliation.
I actually
And-
saw a video on social media the other day of an individual who was living in minimal standards, and he stated in the video that he was afraid of retaliation. And that's I do want to talk to you about that after we get out of this to see what we can do.
There's two sides to that. There's retaliation, and then there's also the side that, look, we're going to address a case when we find it. We are. But when that gets abated, let's just say it's a building, it's a multifamily building, that all the issues are abated. Well, what that's going to do is it's basically going to probably increase the rents, the rental rates at the same time, because the conditions have improved. So there's the rent side of this as well. Our position is to ensure that people are, I think the saying was, if I wouldn't live there, no one else should either.
Absolutely.
If it's a substandard condition. And so, but there are repercussions of what we're discussing here. And we've got examples of that that I can share with you offline.
I think the thing that Matt said, it's not just a fear thing, it's also, I don't have money to go anywhere else.
Absolutely
And,
true.
and even though there's two really good acts in North Carolina that help enforce these things, you gotta go spend money. And I know Legal Aid has had their budget cut, so they're less able to provide resources to those who need them. So I think as a council, when we go from, okay, complaint-based, and, you know, you have people that aren't inclined to complain because of fear, because they don't have anywhere else to go. And now we go to investigation. What we need to do is to back our city when they do this.
Absolutely.
Oh, well, this is so-and-so, we're going to slow roll. No, you got a violation.
Absolutely.
It should be regimented as to what happens. And that's where the council's got to back the city and our stuff. And we got to be strong in that to make sure. Because once that happens, for 6 months to a year, then that's what everybody will know is coming. And I think for so long they've been complaint-based and it's kind of do what they want to do. And while somebody's putting the money and they go collect it, they collect it and don't worry about it.
Precisely.
You know, it's a sad thing to know that you can't have AC because those two acts provide that you're supposed to have those things. You're supposed to have refrigerators, HVAC and that kind of stuff. But too many times you have people who just can't afford to go to court and violate it. And then they go, well, where else can I go? It's almost like they gotta stay in this condition, which that's our responsibility to make sure they don't.
There you go. Couldn't say it better myself. Dr. Wright.
You gave me the cliff notes.
Any other questions before we move on? This is not going away. This is our first presentation to you. We're going to be keeping you engaged in our progress.
I'd like to see monthly, you know, how
Sure.
much we're increasing
We
the
are-
caseload.
Exactly. We are working on that right now to provide, just like we do with building inspections and new permits, we provide monthly updates to council so that you can see the progress of development within our community. We're working on that as well to provide you an update on the cases that we have open and that we have closed and what the status of it is right now.
Perfect, thank you.
All right. Okay. Next item on.
Good presentation, by the way.
Good job, thank you. Next item on our agenda is update regarding the short-term rentals. We'll be asking our Assistant City Attorney, Tim Birch, to come forward with the presentation. And note that this is an information item. I believe it was asked by Councilmember Robinson as well as Mayor Pro Tem to bring forward information related to short-term rentals. So we are presenting you information on that in this item.
Good afternoon, council, and those attending and listening in. In response to questions posed by council regarding the regulation of short-term rentals and the collection of occupancy tax, staff set about the mission to gather information on these issues, headed up by Assistant City Manager Danae Alexander, who coordinated communication between city and staff. Two individuals that are here with us today, the President and CEO of Greenville Pitt Convention and Visitors Authority, Andrew Schmidt, and Russell Hill with Pitt County Tax Office, who were instrumental in collaborating with city staff on these issues to get a better understanding and present that information to you today. So what are we talking about? Short-term rentals are defined under Chapter 42A of the Vacation Rental Act as overnight stays not longer than 90 days. You can think of them in two categories. You have homestays where the host owner stays at the property and rents out a room, and you have whole house rentals where they rent you the house and they leave or not on the property. So just those are, I guess, the types. We don't define them or break them down any further, but other locations have regulated in certain ways that do make that distinction, so I just pointed out. Keep it in mind that the city is prohibited from maintaining or requiring registration. So there are limits as to how accurate we can be about the number of units that are in our city and ETJ. But city staff have done the best they could with the information they have, and using those tools have concluded that we have in our area 272 units that we believe to be short-term rentals. 252 within the city limits and 20 in the ETJ. Of those 272, they are spread out over nearly 20 zoning districts, so they're not all in residential areas. 58 of those, of the 272, are actually located in something that is not a residential zoning district, and that's important later on. So just keep that number in mind when we get to that 58, because it triggers an assessment that we may need to consider. Citywide by type, if we think about the platforms that are used for these, 215 are located on Airbnb, 6 on VRBO, and 51 on both platforms. The city does not currently regulate short-term rentals, does not have a short-term rental use. The General Assembly has made some attempt, or there was at least an attempt introduced in 25-26 to preempt this area through that Senate Bill 291. It didn't receive any great action. It's still sort of dangling out there, but just we bring it up just by way of information to let you know that there at least has been some interest by some members of the General Assembly to engage in this area. If we think about an update, Ms. Alexander updated council, I believe, in 2022, and at that time there were 172 rental units, or what we believe to be short-term rental units. And presently, it being 272, that's an increase of roughly 100 from the last update. How do other cities approach this issue? So this slide lets you know that that there have been attempts by these municipalities to regulate short-term rentals. Including Greensboro, Raleigh, Pinehurst, and all the ones that you see on the top part of that slide. Some municipalities who have made no attempts at regulation are Charlotte and Cary. Of the ones that are regulating, let's look at some examples. Raleigh, for instance, what is it that they do? Raleigh requires and what I would point out before I move to that, keep in mind that the cities that have regulated in this area did so before some changes in our law. So in 2024, we had some changes that sort of go under the umbrella of downzoning, and we're going to talk about that in a little bit. But these were existing regulations before any recent changes in the law, and post a Court of Appeals decision that we're going to talk about in a little bit more detail, the Schroeder case. But let's look at what other locations have done. Raleigh requires permits. They limit cooking in the bedrooms. I didn't know that was an issue, but Raleigh has apparently identified that it is. They do regulate or limit exterior signs, special events and gatherings. Think about it in terms of like a party house. They limit the use of short-term rentals as daycare. They limit the live-work scenario. Think about it, it's a residential property used for commercial purposes. Think about an accessory dwelling unit. It's attached to the residence. They live there, but they're using it really for commercial purposes. And so Raleigh regulates that scenario. I'm not keeping up with the slide, sorry. Here's the live, work, daycare. They do also limit multi-unit living use to no more than 25% or 2 dwellings, whichever is greater, in any given building, right? So they have taken action to limit the number of short-term rentals in a specific building. They require operators to comply with all applicable state and local laws, including those related to fire and building codes, smoke detecting, carbon monoxide detecting equipment, housing codes. They require the zoning permit to be conspicuously posted on advertisements. And that brings us to Greensboro. Greensboro does much of the same under their land development ordinance. They require permits. They limit short-term rentals to residential dwelling units. They also limit in multi-family buildings the number of units that can be used. They further regulate the number of adults that are allowed per rented room. And they say there are no publicly announced or promoted events that involve more than 2 times the number of guests that are allowed in a short-term rental. They regulate signs. They regulate parking. Parking in Greensboro is limited to 1 car per bedroom rented and subject to relevant community standards. They also have a unique take on if they rent the entire home, the owners must reside in Guilford County or in an adjacent county. In addition to that, the host must post their contact information and be readily accessible throughout the rental period. We've seen it in other locations where they say they have to be able to respond within a certain number of hours so that you don't have a guest there at the property and you have an absentee owner who's nowhere nearby, they're in California or somewhere else and can't respond. So again, those are ways that and examples that cities have elected to engage, again, prior to some changes in our law. So what have we done with some information? Greenville Police Department through Captain Wooten was kind enough, if you think back to that earlier slide where we talked about city staff identifying, using the best information we can as to where short-term rentals might be located in our city. We had blue dots all around the city, uniformly positioned. Captain Wooten took that information and basically grabbed an approximate address, just to give us some sense of what's going on out in the world, right? And so using that approximate address and looking for calls for service within 300 feet of that approximate address, we were able to sort of view calls for service that could or might be related to short-term rental use. It's not perfect. It's really sort of the best information that we can gather, again, because we're prohibited from maintaining registration and lists of these properties. We cannot require owners to disclose that they have a rental and it's at this address and location. It's not on Airbnb and VRBO. The days of the address actually being identified on the platform are gone. But what did it tell us? It told us that we had roughly 12 properties that had a number of calls, and those calls for service were geographically close to what we might think is a short-term rental nearby. The types of calls were fairly common: disturbing the peace, suspicious activity, disputes, marijuana, parties, animal complaints, welfare checks. I think down here it's some property damage, domestic disturbances, parking violations, welfare checks. Again, those are all using that 300-foot radius. Where are those 12 properties located? If we overlay it on a map of Greenville, again, fairly uniformly distributed, not just in any one particular area of the city. So we're going to move from this issue here to talk about some taxing issues, and then we're going to come back to the short-term rental regulation.
I have a question real quick.
Yes.
So you said that we're restricted from forcing these property owners to register. How do these other municipalities enforce?
They were sort of on the books before there were changes in the law. And so you had cities like Raleigh that had a permit process, Pinehurst, Greensboro, they required the permits, they were already registered through that permit process, and then the changes in law occurred, and we're going to talk about that in pretty good detail as to why that kind of puts us in a weird.
So they're only able to enforce the properties that they had previously registered, and any new properties that I guess turn into short-term rentals, they kind of just.
Yeah, if in like cities like Asheville, for instance, there's been some cases where they did try to limit the use of new short-term rental as properties, new properties as short-term rentals, and because they had an existing ordinance on the books that predated in this case, the 2024 action with respect to downzoning, they're viewed to be fine, certainly in their mind. There have been no cases litigated on that issue, so I'll be the first to tell you we're kind of we don't know exactly how the courts would interpret it, but the plain language of the statute gives us some pause on that issue. Did that answer your question?
Yes, sir. Thank
you. So with respect to taxes, there's a couple, you're going to see this 1207C that's referenced a number of times tonight because it first addresses the issue of whether you could regulate through requiring a special fee or a tax on a residential rental property. And the upshot of that is you cannot unless you do it against all commercial and residential properties. There are two exceptions. They're commonly thought to be best characterized as chronic local ordinance violators and maybe hotspots for criminality. That's kind of the two areas that operate as an exception, and we'll see that in a number of areas of the law. But the first place we see it is with respect to the ability to impose any sort of tax on short-term rentals. And then that gets us to what is the authority of us locally imposing tax through this occupancy tax. Well, we don't have that independent authority, but we do have local acts that were passed back in 1987 and 1993 that gave permission for the county to collect taxes and transmit those tax dollars to, in this case, the authority. And then that gets sort of divided in also a very convoluted way, but I think I have a way to break it down as to how the numbers work out, so it'll make sense. The county charges so 6% is the sort of default tax. We started off with 3 and then they added another 3 in 93. So that's how we got to 6. If you look at all other municipalities across the state, the legislature has basically said 6 is our cap. We're just not going anywhere north of that. There's one exception, it's the city of Charlotte, and they got an extra 2% to have the NASCAR museum or something, but it's an exception. The general rule is 6% is what you're gonna get from the legislature, and that is what we have locally here in Pitt County, Greenville. So we also have
Tim, I'll ask you-
go ahead, yeah.
So how do we know we're collecting that occupancy tax?
So we're coming to that. There is some slides.
Okay.
And I'll be candid with you. There is nobody that's going to be able to tell you that we're collecting every dollar, and I'll explain why. We have a pretty good sense of certainly what we are collecting, and I think we can break it down in a couple of the slides that are coming up. But I think we can also explain why it's not a perfect system. And every municipality is confronting this exact issue. It's not unique to us. All right, so 6% is our starting point. So you remember I told you we had 3% and then another 3%. So what this slide tells you is that 50% over there, that's the initial 3%. The second 3% is divided between the authority and the city getting an extra 1%, and the authority keeping 2% for itself to promote tourism in Pitt, Greenville area. So the way to think about this is we have 4 of the 6% that come to Greenville, and the reason we have that is because we have an interlocal agreement with the county in 1997 that they basically said, you city, figure out what you need to do, even though it was initially given to both the city and the county. The county has said, you manage the money. So we're managing 4 of the 6%, and 2 of the 6% goes to the authority, which represents 1/3 and 2/3 when you do the math. So when we get to the next slide that actually breaks out the dollars, that's how the county actually divides the money up. They will issue payment to the city and the authority in those percentages, the 1/3, 2/3.
When you say the city and the authority is?
It's a weird way that it's worded. So the money actually is by operation of the 97 and the 93 law. The money is, the county is directed to give the money to the authority, and the city is directed to authorize the authority to use that 1/3 for.
And the authority
is the convention center. Sorry, I apologize.
That's
yeah.
what I was trying to get out
Oh.
for watching. Oh.
But, yeah. The Greenville Pitt Convention and Visitors Authority is the authority. I missed a step there, but so when we look at the dollars that are collected, what has happened over the years from 21, this breaks it out, by the way, between the occupancy tax that is charged by hotels from what is collected by the online platforms. Again, the 2 major online platforms being Airbnb and VRBO. There are others, but generally speaking, it's been an upward trajectory of receiving monies from the online platforms who become, by operation of law, the entity that's required to collect the occupancy tax. It's no longer on, if you list your property as a homeowner with VRBO or Airbnb, or you have a property management company, it is their responsibility to collect the money and to then on the 20th of the following month to pay the county the tax. It is no longer then on the property owner. If you have your property in one of these platforms or through a property management, the facilitator is the one that is responsible. Any enforcement action is against the facilitator, not against the property owner if it's been collected. Yeah.
Aren't they required to also register with the North Carolina Department of Revenue?
Are who required?
The Airbnbs or the short-term rentals?
The short-term rentals are definitely not required. And Airbnb and VRBO, I suspect the answer is also no. And the reason I think I can say that is when our local office receives payments for the online platforms, they are not identified as this is for parcel X, this is for parcel Y, this is for parcel Z. They send one check, and this is all of the occupancy tax that they have collected for stays that have been booked through their platform.
Well, the reason I'm asking that, I understand they're supposed to register with the North Carolina Department of Revenue so they can get the sales tax. So I'm trying to figure out if they register with the North Carolina Department of Revenue, can we get access to that list to see who is actually short-term rental here in Pitt County? And also, if we see one that we recognize as a short-term rental that's not registered, we can share that data with the Department of Revenue and let them take action against them. That's why I asked that question.
Yeah, and it's a great question. I don't know that there's a great answer right now. This has been bounced off of the School of Government, and I don't mean to evade the question, but it's a tricky area, and it's because under this, is it the next slide? The next slide. Under the next slide, our county tax office is limited in the information that it can share and disclose. And so by operation of law, the local tax records that contain information about a taxpayer's income or receipts are not public records under those two provisions. A room occupancy tax return, so think about it, every month on the 20th of the month, if I'm just if I'm using my place as an Airbnb and I don't have one of these platforms, I'm doing it on my own, I have the independent responsibility to file my taxes with the county tax office, and they have a little return. It's on their website, the tax office, on the 20th. But outside of that, of me doing that, the tax office cannot share that tax return that is filed with them. It's not a public record and may not be disclosed under those statutory provisions. So it puts the tax office in a tricky bind. I get what you're saying with respect to registering for the Department of Revenue, and that may be something very well staff can look into further to see, you know, what information might or could be available. But every bit of information that staff has received up to this point has indicated that other jurisdictions are confronting the same issue, and it is not available. It has not been available to other locations either, but I think we can definitely look into it, maybe get a harder answer on that.
I'm just trying to figure out a way, we may need to go to General Assembly. How do we track these entities? So, number one, for zoning, if we decide to do zoning, but number two, how we also can try and collect the occupancy tax.
Yeah,
Because when I first talked about this, I think there were 100 and something. How many there are now?
272. About an increase
It's
of
going to
100.
continue to grow, and so we need to get on top of it. But I'm just trying to figure out, you know, because what's to stop a person who decides, okay, I can make $1,800 a night on this rental, this unit, so I can rent it out 1 week and pay for my payment twice. And I'm not going to tell the Department of Revenue, I'm not going to tell Greenville.
Yeah.
Let me ask, Russell, if the county requested all sales tax by vendor, do you know if the Department of Revenue would release that information to us?
They may, not sure if they would.
Because that's what you're getting at. If you just knew how much sales tax is being collected by.
Well,
you
not so
can
much
cross-reference
the
it.
sales tax is who is registered.
Or just,
That way I know if they're registered and they're paying, I don't care about the sales tax, 'cause we don't get any of that.
yeah.
I just want to know, oh, you're a short-term rental, so now we need to make sure, you're getting occupancy tax. That's what I'm trying to get at. Can they cross-share the list?
I think the issue's gonna be for our office, we don't get a list.
That's
So
what I
even-
want to get
so- So
at.
even if Department of Revenue has the list, I don't have a list to cross-reference once it comes to my office, so I may know there's a gap there, but I have no way of knowing where that gap is. Does that make sense? Because I don't have, if it was 100 there, but only 90 was submitted, I have no way of checking off which 90 paid and which 10 didn't. Because we get a lump sum in the tax office. It's just, here's your check.
I would bet money there's some short-term rentals here in Pitt County that aren't registered.
Absolutely.
Sure, and I would also, and again, I don't know, but I'm guessing it's by design. Airbnb probably have some pretty decent lobbyists. There's a reason why the state has not allowed the registration issue, right? It's not, we're specifically precluded from doing that under Schroeder, and they have not enacted the pending legislation, which is that State Bill 291, that might allow some further identification, but I think actually in that Senate Bill 291, they specifically say you cannot require a registration.
I didn't mean to get all the weeds on this, it's just a presentation, but
Yeah.
that's my concern. We have some way to try and track these businesses.
Yeah,
One thing is certain, like Tim is saying, the General Assembly has made it difficult to regulate short-term rentals. And as Tim has mentioned, General Statute 160D 1207 and the Schroeder versus Wilmington case, which is the case out of Wilmington where they invalidated the short-term rental ordinance on grounds that it require registration. A city cannot require a short-term rental owner to register their property with the city on the front end or the back end. You can't do it. The law is very clear on that.
What the byproduct of that, and what's frustrating to me, is that we've got citizens struggling through their quality of life being impacted from there being an Airbnb Wild Wild West in residential neighborhoods. And so I do understand where there have been restrictions put on us for how we are able to manage it. But I'm gonna wait till the end, because I've been making some notes on, I've been doing a lot of homework on this, because my phone rings off the hook between, and it's become like another job between substandard housing and what's going on with these Airbnbs. You know, having disrespectful not being good neighbors in neighborhoods where people are just trying to live in peace. And so I hear everything that they're saying that we can't do. I want to hear about what we can do.
Yeah.
And we're gonna get to that.
Yeah, and so you use the perfect terminology. You just anticipated my next slide.
Thank you.
So, being good, well, not the next one. The next one after that. We already talked about this one.
3 slides
So Airbnb, one thing that we could do is make sure that our folks are aware of what's available on the individual platforms. If you think about the numbers that we talked about earlier, that is, 200 plus are on Airbnb, and another 51 that are shared on Airbnb and VRBO. The platforms do have some resources available that if we can make sure to get word out to the community, that it might be a very valuable resource. So Airbnb has a community disturbance policy that prohibits disruptive gatherings, community disturbances regardless of size, excessive noise, trash, trespassing, smoking nuisances, parking nuisances, vandalism, open invite gatherings, advertising a listing to say it's party friendly, severe or repeated disruptive gatherings or disturbances. Airbnb calls this their neighborhood support team. They have an 800 number and they have an online reporting tool. Again, I'm not saying it's perfect, but it is something that folks may not be aware of that is available to them to report the property, because ultimately with enough complaints, presumably under this policy, Airbnb would seek to remove them from being able to list their property on the Airbnb platform, which if you're an owner of one of these short-term rentals, I would think would make you want to pay some attention to, given that that's a significant place where people would list them.
Even if we don't have community members reporting it, could the city or the police department report as they get calls?
So go back to the earlier thing I said. I would love to say that the answer is yes, but here's where there's a little, because we can't require the registration, we don't know exactly the address for a specific property.
I mean, but that wouldn't stop us from still calling and, giving them an address that we suspect is the short-term rental that's happening.
Yeah, they would have to somehow link it to a property that they did have listed. But if they did, and some of it is, if you could see on the platform, and we kind of played around with this a little bit to look at the number of properties, could we tell from the photographs of the listed property? Could we match it using Google Street View or something on Opus that would tell us, is this that property? Is it not that property? And there were a couple that we could pretty clearly identify. They were the Airbnb listed, but generally speaking, it would be pretty labor intensive. But if you could identify that, that would certainly be a way to report that property. So in addition to Airbnb, VRBO has something very similar. They have the Stay Neighborly complaint process. It is also a community disturbance and nuisance policy. The host operator sets the rules regarding what occupancy is allowed, the behaviors that are allowed. They do put some more affirmative obligation on the property owner to prevent issues. Again, they have the ability from a platform to ban disruptive guests and party-prone homes from participating on the booking platform. again, that would be something that we would want to address to the 800 number and to the online reporting tool through that Stay Neighborly complaint process. So how has the landscape changed in recent years? We've been kind of dancing around a little bit. In 2022, this was the seminal case, Schroeder versus City of Wilmington, Court of Appeals decision. Basically, in this case, the City of Wilmington instituted a lottery system and said, we're gonna try to regulate where short-term rentals can be in our city. And they had a lottery system, and the Schroeders got a higher number in the lottery than their neighbor. And one of the requirements under that regulation in Wilmington was you couldn't be within a certain number of feet of another short-term rental. And so they got thrown out, and the Schroeders said, well, we need to do something about this. So they filed a lawsuit, and the court in Schroeder said, yeah, you can't do that. You can't have a lottery system. You can't have a registration. And that's where that law became very clear in Schroeder, that the cities cannot do anything that would be either an actual registration or act as a de facto registration. So that's where we got that rule in 2022. These other locations like Raleigh and Greensboro and Pinehurst, they had long since I say long, Raleigh actually used their UDO not terribly much before this, and have subsequently amended it. So before the 2024 change, but maybe not necessarily here. Pinehurst was well before, Greensboro was well before. So what did Schroeder then go on? I told you we would see this 1207C again, and so we talked about it in the tax consequence. Now we're going to talk about it in what that next prong is. First prong is you can't register. Second prong is you cannot require of owners or managers of rental property to obtain a permit or to seek permission under Articles 11, which is the building code, and Article 12, which is the minimum housing code. You can't tie a permit or seeking permission to either the building code or the minimum housing code. The court said you can't do it. But what did it leave open? It left open Article 7, the zoning, right? So Schroeder took away, and it gave one sort of opening, which is through your zoning authority, can you make changes to regulate short-term rentals? And after Schroeder in 2022, the answer was yes, right? Until we get to 2024. And then I told you also we would see this other thing, that sort of hotspot for criminality and these chronic local ordinance violators. They have different ways of distinguishing it, but several violations in a 30-day period or a number of violations over a 12-month period, and it kind of rolls. But in any event, there is an exception to whether you could require a permit or seek permission under Article 11 and Article 12. They did give you a way to come back to that if you fell into one of those two categories of the hotspot for criminal activity or a chronic local ordinance violator. So it's not to say that under the minimum housing standards and building code that you can't ever go back, but we're significantly limited unless it falls into this category. What does 1207C further restrict? Again, you can't require them to enroll or participate in a government program, such as obtaining a certificate of occupancy. You can't levy a special fee or tax. We talked about that earlier. Again, there is the exception where if you get the chronic violator, where you could do that. It also restricts the city from performing inspections on residential properties. Now again, we're thinking about focused on short-term rentals only, not just in general. But if your focus in regulation is on the short-term rental, the question becomes under the 1207A and B, the city cannot sort of target inspections unless the following conditions are met. and that's when there's reasonable cause to do so. You can make periodic inspections for unsafe, unsanitary, otherwise hazardous or unlawful conditions, inspections in accordance with the state fire prevention code, all of the things that you could ordinarily do across the city, regardless of whether it's a short-term rental or not. But you could not use the short-term rental as a target for, I use that term, I don't mean it in a weird way, I just mean your regulation couldn't be specific on that point to be limited to a short-term rental for that purpose, because it's barred under the 1207A and B. All right, so to answer your question, what can we do?
I submitted a proposal.
What's that?
I said I submitted a proposal.
Yes. So, so here's how we want to look at these issues. So again, post Schroeder, the angle of regulation would be through the zoning authority, and and we look at other jurisdictions where they regulated parking and trash and special events and large parties requiring insurance and buffer yards. Again, that would be allowed after 2022 with Schroeder. But I told you that other thing, that 2024 thing that we have to talk about. We just have to talk about. I don't have definitive answers for you, but I can tell you courts have not interpreted downzoning from a case example. But when you read the statute itself, that is 160D 601, it specifically defines downzoning as a reduction in permitted uses. And then there's a second prong, which is actually the third prong in 601. In that instance, if you create by your ordinance a non-conforming use on something other than a residential property, then that is downzoning by definition. So remember, I told you when we talked about the zoning districts that we had, there were 58 of our 272 properties that were not in residential. They were in something other than residential. So if you pass something, one thing that staff would have to consider is what impact does that have in creating, the way 601 reads right now, today, does it create a non-conforming use on those properties that are non-residential? If so, and it's downzoning, it's prohibited under 601, it's flat out prohibited. So we have two categories. One is if we reduce the number of permitted uses, or if we create that non-conforming situation. Staff has looked at and needs probably more time to better assess, maybe with the help of school government and some other issues. We were looking at the fact that we just passed a UDO, not terribly long ago. That would have been after Schroeder, but it also would have been after the change in law for 601 in 2024. And then the question becomes, would it be downzoning in light of what our law was before we just changed our UDO? There's a lot of moving parts. It's a complicated issue. I don't pretend to have all the answers today, other than to tell you staff has taken it very seriously, are looking at it as best we can to give you the best information that we can give you to make the decisions that that you need to make. So with that in mind, we under the permitted uses, by the way, if it wasn't obvious, any regulation you did that presumably, if somebody is permitted presently to operate a short-term rental, that we don't regulate it, if they're allowed to do it presently, and then after the passage of an ordinance, they're no longer permitted to do it, that would be a reduction in permitted uses such that it would be downzoning under 601. That's the caveat, that's the
If
worry.
we change the zone.
If you change the zoning.
But we can still regulate the parking,
Yeah.
waste,
Thank
you.
occupancy,
Yeah.
operational. We still have a lot of things we can do apart from zoning.
Precisely.
We do. We
Okay,
do.
so that's where I wanted to get, because that, everything that I submitted had, we're not trying to ban anything. I know North Carolina law, prohibits municipalities from banning short-term rentals, from capping the number of rentals, the number of nights that someone can rent or require owner occupancy. So we're not asking to ban, we're not wanting to require owner occupancy. Rather a authorized agent to be available. That's very different. We're not wanting to do strict limits on days. And so the stuff that we can do and what was submitted, I'm trying to wait until you
Yeah.
finish so I can get to,
I'm sorry, I feel like I'm letting you down.
that's fine, you're fine.
Yeah, no,
He's
it's,
getting there.
yeah,
It's taking a long time to get there.
yeah, I'm sorry,
Right.
I'm sorry.
Like an
Okay,
ant going to
so,
Florida.
all right, so along those lines, we have our general police powers. Let's move on to, what does council wish to do? Regulate, in doing so, what is the public involvement? Evaluation of those police powers that we currently have, general ordinances that cover some of the things that you might be concerned about, including in any proposed regulation, the severability, like in Schroeder, I'll give you an example. Schroeder dealt with parking. So one of the issues, Mayor Pro Tem, that was proposed, by way of example, was to regulate parking, which sounds completely benign, and you would think not a problem. Except in Schroeder, they actually had two parking provisions. And so the answer is, like lawyers are prone to give, it depends. So in one case, the parking required the city attorney to approve the parking plan. And the court said, no, that is tantamount to registration. You cannot require the parking to be authorized by, in this case, the city attorney.
And which we weren't asking.
And then they went on to say, oh, but by the way, there's another parking provision that says one parking space per bedroom at an off-site location. And they said, well, that's not tied to anything that requires registration, so we find you can do that. But they wrote in there, but by the way, the enforcement mechanism isn't us, the city, tracking them down. It's that they envision the renter would say to the city, hey, by the way, I rented this property at such and such location, and they didn't have the required parking that's required of an Airbnb. And that would be the way that the city would find out about it, rather than requiring, again, think about that scenario where the city attorney had to approve the parking plan. That can't happen, but in this case, they say, well, it can happen, but by the way, it can't also be a de facto registration. So again, I know it's muddy water, but what it would require is very careful crafting so that the things that you're interested in doing can be done in a way that wouldn't be considered a de facto registration requirement, that it's not so intertwined. It could be completely separate and stand on its own, like that individual parking space thing. But again, the enforcement mechanism of that gets a little hazy, because it would require, in that case, the renter to have sort of ratted out the property owner in that case. So we have three buckets. All right. So bucket one is, again, we have the sort of Schroeder thing. Keep it in mind, and I know nobody likes to think about when Raleigh might do something different, but there is a Senate bill in place, 587, that would restore the city's rights to where we were before the change in 2024. It would basically allow the city to initiate changes in zoning without regard, it would not be considered down zoning, right? And so that bill that is pending would remove one hurdle from our analysis, and would allow us to consider these issues only for whether they would be, the way that we wrote them, whether they would be considered a registration requirement. So presumably they could be written in a way that wouldn't require that, and hopefully Raleigh does something different that would allow us to not have to worry about down zoning. as an issue. But for right now, we still do have in bucket 2, those items, all kind of the same thing, but we do have to, at least for right now, while it is the law under that 601, we do have to consider that downzoning under the one prong of a reduced permitted, a reduction in permitted uses or a non-conforming use. That being said, monitor 587, use the information that we have regarding locations that are suspected of being problem areas to consider a stepped up code enforcement, including noise ordinance, minimum housing code, unsafe buildings, enforcement of other police powers. That's still available to us. Directing staff to further investigate whether certain changes of interest to council with respect to regulation of short-term rentals can be made under present law and written in a way that would not be considered, again, a de facto registration and not a down zone.
I had several of these call me 2 years ago when this stuff started. My neighbors and like, what can we do to stop this? And first I went to the restrictive covenants. I think a lot of builders back when that neighborhood was built where I live now, you know, the typical nuisance. But this was not an event. So is it worthy of us trying to have a roundtable with local developers and builders to say, this is a problem for our city. We hope you would entertain your restrictive covenants to put maybe parking, short-term rentals, because they can put that in the restrictive covenants and this will not be a issue in the new neighborhoods as we grow. But I think that would be worthy of having a roundtable saying, what do they think as a builder? Because I know most people will buy a home, like I know Mayor Pro Tem, you and I have talked to one person, served in the military, got home, his dream home, and now he's got party after party after party, and people coming and going all hours of the night disturbing his peace, and that kills the property value. Also disturbs your psychological, emotional, mental health, because you want to have a nice place to live and not like you feel like you're in Party Central. But I think that would be worthy of us having, or I say staff or city, having a roundtable meeting with a lot of the local developers, say, hey, this is the issue. Get your input, because they can solve it going forward by saying no short-term rentals allowed in this housing development.
Yeah, that, you know, HOAs and from a covenant, restrictive covenant standpoint, they're not bound by this. This is all whether the local government acts, that's where the violation occurs.
I think we need to pursue that, because that will
And
solve it going forward.
What I'm doing is, you know, in addition to submitting proposal based on what we could do with the city, working with HOAs to develop covenants within their systems that, you know, it could complement each other. But all I'm asking us to do is our part.
Yeah.
If you go back to the bucket.
Yes, sir.
I mean, the way I see this is that what we've got to do is, these are some of the no-brainers, so to speak, that I know you put together a plan, well, without even knowing your plan, we had already identified,
Exactly.
these are the, so I think the next step would be, and we've got a lot of legalese involved in this. Let's just say, all right. Okay. So anytime you get attorneys into it, it's going to get complicated. Maybe so. But nonetheless, what we've got is, we've got the Schroeder and we've got the downzoning. I think the next step would be to take this list
Right.
and see what kind of options we would have under the umbrella of those two rules. We don't have that answer right now. But I think those are the kind of things that we've got sitting on the table. If we could take the current, the statute downzoning and the current, in the Schroeder case, and see how and if we could write an ordinance around these regulations, these boundaries, that would be the first step.
And for what it's worth, that downzoning statute's gonna likely change. When I was on the legislative policy committee with the league, I mean, that's like one of the #1 priorities for most of the like local municipalities throughout the state is they messed this up, they didn't think it out when they passed it, and there's been several efforts to try to repeal it or change it. So we don't really know what type of version is gonna exist within the next 6 months to a year, or if it's gonna change within the next 6 months to a year, but I think that's, the writing on the wall seems to be that's gonna be the indication, which has left all municipalities kind of stuck, because you're like, do you comply with the new version? You know it's gonna change, like you're all trying to adapt and maneuver around the code, but that is gonna drastically change the analysis. 'Cause they repeal that, it's
I
much
guess
easier.
what my
for us.
challenge is, and where my concern is that this conversation was initially had, if I remember correctly, in 2022. So we missed an opportunity
There you go.
to address this in 2022. And so now we're behind the 8 ball, and our citizens are struggling because of it. And the other thing is within the realm of what we know we can do right now, which is occupancy limits, not parking restrictions based on what that lawsuit was, but saying that trying to address on-street parking as it relates to being in an Airbnb, and prohibiting large gatherings. You know, Airbnbs are an alternative residence when one is traveling. It's not your party location. And citizens should not have to deal with that. Looking at multifamily units and seeing what we can do within the realm of how many can be held or hosted in a multifamily dwelling. I understand the insurance mandates, but having a local contact person is very different than having an owner have to live on site. And so, you know, I'm hearing what you're saying, but, you know, we're asking within the realm of what we can do to put something in place and not wait, because our citizens are having to deal with the byproducts of this right now. And so if we have to adjust something later, I understand that, but not waiting until the General Assembly does something else. Because if this had been responded to in 2022 when it was first brought up, we probably wouldn't be having these conversations today.
So, based off what your comment just was then, and what I had said earlier, the next step would be to take these parameters, a list of these parameters right here, and see if we could come back with some recommendations to council, again, underneath the umbrella
We
of the.
support you. I just know people are struggling, that's all.
Also think that panel suggestion is a great idea.
Uh-huh.
You can get in the front end with the covenants and things like that, awesome way to maneuver around.
All right, all thumbs up.
All
All
thumbs
right,
up.
here we go.
Ready?
Mayor Pro Tem. yes.
Motion to adjourn?
Motion adjourned.
Second.
All right, motion made by Councilmember Robinson and seconded by Councilmember Willis. All those in favor? Aye. All right, we got a few minutes, y'all.